we're starting off a new message series over the next few weeks titled this, People in Process, Learning to Trust God. People in process, learning to trust God. And here's what I've observed being a fellow human being is that oftentimes we are uncomfortable with the idea of process. I don't know about you, but I love clear and clean categories. Anybody else? You know, I like neat categories. I like when things match up and align. When I was getting my bachelor's degree in biblical studies, I loved what's called systematic theology, which is like the study of God, where essentially it's like, let's take all the topics of the Bible and then let's put them in nice, neat categories that are in alphabetical order. So you can grab a nice systematic theology book and any topic you want, you just flip to it in alphabetical order and you can find it. And it's all these big, amazing, huge topics about God that are put almost into an encyclopedia or a library. I love that. But the problem is I wish life could actually be like that as well, in neat little categories of perfection. But reality is, we know this, we are people in process. Things get messy and unpredictable. And a more clear way, or clear lines way of thinking, really partners around something in a specific, it's called category theory, that's in anthropological studies. And the clear lines way of thinking really aligns with what's called bounded set theory. And so we have a picture up on the screen. It really helps us understand what bounded set theory is all about. It's a way that oftentimes we organize or think about people. And bounded set is very in or out, right? You could call this framework like boundaries for belonging. Like, how do we behave when it comes to the idea of belonging? You're in, you're out. You can take any classic dichotomy in modern life and kind of flip whether you're in or out, right? And we experience this all the time. We experience this in morality, right? Like good or evil. Like you're in with goodness or you're out and you're more evil, right? We do this with politics. You're in with Republicans or you're out with Democrats or vice versa, right? We do this with reality TV, either Bachelor in Paradise or Love Island, right? I'm not gonna give you what my choice would be, right? But we do this with spirituality as well, right? Are you a follower of Jesus? Are you on the inside, or are you not? Are you part of the church? Are you on the inside, or are you not? Essentially, are you one of us? And I think this is an interesting paradigm of how we think about belonging, because when it comes to Christian behaviors and Christianity, we've taken this to a whole nother level. We've created a whole subculture around this, right? You can put Christian in front of like any word you want now, right? Christian radio, Christian film, Christian t-shirts, Christian bookstores, Christian bands, right? And when it comes to bounded set theory, we could say, well, like, do your behaviors match up? Are you in with the Christian culture? Or are you out? Do you exist within this category or not? But an alternate way of thinking about this would be what's called centered set, which we'll have that up on the screen. And this is less about in or out, and it's more about directionality towards a center. Way more process-oriented, much like we are as people in process, as complex human beings. So the question in a centered set is, am I headed towards the center? And even in this example, right, when we're thinking about spirituality, am I moving towards Jesus, the person of Jesus, or am I moving away from him? And here's the irony, if we get the picture of both up on the screen. So now we have both of these, right? It's kind of an idea. The bounded set, the in or the out. The centered set that is more directional in our orientation, right? And the irony is that on the left side there, you can actually have people that don't represent. Let's take Christian culture. I mentioned that as an example, right? That don't engage in Christian culture with Christian behaviors. Don't watch Christian film, right? Don't wear Christian t-shirts. Don't have a Christian bumper sticker, right? So they don't fit inside the circle of Christian culture, but they actually could be like a person on that right side. Although they don't fit within the culture, their hearts are towards Jesus himself. And probably more frightening than that idea is that you can have people on the inside of that red circle, inside the church, inside Christian culture, inside matching all the behaviors that represent that in and out, and they're on the inside, but their backs are actually turned from the person of Jesus, and they're moving away from him. Here's how I know I prefer neat categories. When I talk about this, I'm automatically going bounded set on this. So going, well, centered set's the better one than bounded set, right? So now I'm creating my own bounded set of these two very things right here, right? This is how we know we prefer that left side, like in or out, clear lines, hard lines, boundaries. We want to know, we want to be clear. But here's what we know. Boundaries in and of themselves aren't bad. They're actually meant to preserve, to protect good. But yes, we have to admit, boundaries sometimes can become abusive. They can become oppressive, harmful. Rather than being used to preserve and protect as God designed them, boundaries can be used to divide and to create walls. In bounded set, depending on where you say the in and the out is, can so easily become what we call try harder Christianity, right? Name any behavior and attach it to the idea of, does this earn your belovedness? If I pray more, if I get in church more, if I read my Bible more as a means to be loved, if I don't do those things, am I on the outside trying to find my way in on the inside? And this is where religious boundaries and behaviors are no longer a place to preserve and protect what is good, but are actually used to isolate people from God's belovedness. The truth is, we need both in healthy community. You need centered set, the directional, and you need bounded set. I'll just give you an example. Simple example for us as a local church. We believe everybody's on a centered set journey towards Jesus. We believe that. I think that's helpful. That you're in a direction, you're moving towards him, away from him. We believe everybody's that. But we believe that not everybody can serve with kids. We require a certain type of vetting that will automatically exclude people based on how they orient themselves towards the requirements for the purpose of protecting and preserving children who are vulnerable. So we, as a church, yes, we believe in centered set directionality towards, away from, but we also believe in boundaries. You're either in or you're out. You either do what we require of you to serve alongside a vulnerable community in our church family or not, right? So both is good. But back to the main point of this series. People in process. And I had us turn to Exodus chapter 16 because we're going to look at this specific story, and we're going to see in this specific story of people that they kind of represent a both and in the category of bounded set and centered set as this example. See, the main characters of this story are very bounded set. They're in. These are God's people that we're going to be reading about. God's chosen people. Descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, called the Israelites, later becoming, past this story, the actual nation of Israel. But as we're about to read, they are in some very centered set, directional type of circumstances with God in an environment where God is asking, hey, I've freed you from slavery in Egypt. They're coming from this oppressive situation where they were under the slavery of Egyptians, and God has freed them. And now they're in this environment that is less than ideal, and God is asking a very directional question for a people that are on the inside. These are God's people, but he's concerned about their directionality. Do you trust me? Are you moving towards me? And the big truth of learning to trust God as we enter into this first week of this message series and what we're going to look at in the biblical text, the big truth we're going to engage this morning is simply this, is that God meets us right where we are. So we're going to read the first 18 verses of Exodus 16 together, and then we're going to make some hopefully helpful observations about the text. So Exodus chapter 16, it'll be up on the screen for you if you don't have a Bible once again. We're going to read through these 18 verses. It says this: the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. So to do all that ancient Near Eastern math right there, about 1 month out. 1 month out from being freed from slavery in Egypt, and they're on this journey towards a mountain of worship, Sinai, that's listed there. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So Moses and Aaron are these two leaders, these two mediator figures on behalf of God to the people of God. Verse 3, the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." Verse 5, on the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. And the purpose for this we know is because when God designed the universe, the 7th day symbolized a day of rest. So here we see God prioritizing limitations, saying, hey, on that 6th day, gather twice as much, because on that 7th day, you're going to honor the reality of rest, even in this context, in this situation. So Moses, verse 6, so Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you the meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening, quail came and covered the camp. Now, when I imagine a meat, like an equivalent of like a meat feast, I'm thinking like Southern barbecue. I'm thinking like the barbecue that I used to eat when I lived in Oklahoma, right? God provides quail. So I guess that's the ancient Near East equivalent, right? Quail. Awesome. The evening, quail came and covered the camp. Cool. God's providing. And in the morning, where's the bread at? There was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, the flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, which is about 10 cups. I had to look it up. Once again, ancient Near East equivalent. 10 cups, right? Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. I love this story that we read about this ancient people who are moving in a journey with God. And we realize that God meets these Israelites right where they are. And if the Bible that we're reading this morning is in fact a record of reliable experiences with God, the question for us becomes, okay, what can we learn from this ancient story, especially when it comes to the idea of how do we trust God today, as we are a people in process, right? And so for the first observation I want to make today, this becomes kind of the first point, is that God transforms inside out, not top down. Let me say that again. God transforms inside out, not top down. I'll say this. They're headed towards a mountain. They're headed towards this appointment with God where they're going to worship God on what's called Mount Sinai. In fact, let's look at verse 1 again in Exodus 16. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. So there's that mountain on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. So I think it's helpful for us as we observe this. Let's do a little bit of an environment check. Where is God meeting them? Now, Elim is actually this story that where they're coming from, this oasis. It's this beautiful oasis that after they've been liberated from slavery, they literally get this time of refreshment, a time for them to be refreshed after being oppressed. So God leads them out of this oasis, and now there's this appointment to the mountain where they're going to have this next appointment with God. They're being led towards this place where God is going to meet them next. But in the in-between, they're between an oasis, and they're between this mountaintop experience with God in a place literally called the Desert of Sin, a valley region. What's been beautiful, even as we've been kind of teaching through some stories in the Old Testament, that first 2/3 of the scripture, what you realize, the back half of our Bible, the back 1/3, what we would call the Christian Bible, right? There's a lot of parallel stories. We're reading a lot of stories that you're like, wow, like this actually parallels a lot with stories that existed during Jesus' time. So we know this in biblical history. We're going to fast forward a little bit. 1,000 years later, after this story, God comes to earth in human form. His name is Jesus. And the wild thing about it, he comes to earth as a baby in an everyday place, lives in a place that's despised called Nazareth. He comes and he doesn't come as a ruler in high places. So we looked at this story of the people of God, as they're in this wilderness, they're in this moment, they're in this location that's less than ideal. And the parallel story that we see in the Gospel of John later on in the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, it's actually really interesting. Because Jesus, his environment that this story starts in, guess where he starts? He starts up on the mountainside. Some of you, maybe you grew up in church, you're familiar with the story where that Jesus fed the 5,000. These massive crowds started following Jesus. He's like a local celebrity. And what does Jesus do? He serves this crowd. They're hungry as they're following him. And there's this amazing moment where the fish and the loaves, they don't have enough, but God, he multiplies them. He provides for them, and they're up, and they're having this, there it is, this picturesque mountain on top of God moment. Jesus is providing for them. And then, if you know or you're familiar with the story, Jesus is like, I got to get out of here. I got to get away from these crowds. So what does he do? He goes down the mountain. And then his earliest, or his closest followers, they go down the mountain, and they encounter this lake. And then they get caught up in some rough waters. It's a story where they're like, what are we supposed to do? And Jesus, what does he do? He comes to the rescue. He's like, in these choppy waters, you got to trust me. There's waves splashing. They literally think they're going to die. They see this ghost, right? But it's Jesus. He's there in the midst of these waters. So they're having this moment, this real life moment where Jesus is teaching this lesson down the mountain, away from the crowds. And what do you know? The crowds are like, man, this guy just fed me. It's time to go get fed more. So they're after Jesus. And this is where we're picking up in this parallel story. The crowd is looking for this one who fed them down the mountain. It says this in John chapter 6, starting with verse 26. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, but not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Dang, it's kind of savage of Jesus, right? Jesus literally comes down the mountain into an area of rough waters, and he begins to teach a hard lesson about participation and partnership with him, especially if those people are going to call him rabbi, which means teacher. He's like, hey, if you want to learn the things about life, we got to come down from the mountain into the space of rough waters where things happen, where things get a little messy. And if you want to follow me, it's going to have to be a lot bigger than providing for this need that you have that is in front of you, that you're depending upon me for. Well, we know this. This hard lesson that Jesus goes on for the next several verses and teaches these people about, we read what the results are in John chapter 6, verse 66. It says this, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Here's what we learn about that story, is that the crowd, they didn't want to move towards God an inside-out relationship. Where Jesus is like, I'm going to meet you right wherever you are in the real life scenarios, the rough waters, and you're going to have to participate with me in relationship. See, rather than engage with God in participation and in relationship, these people, this crowd who chased after Jesus, they expected him to perform in his top-down rulership and authority. Their expectations were top-down. They wanted material provision. They wanted him to come as their rightful Messiah, to liberate them from the political situation that they currently were in. But Jesus is teaching them a simple lesson. Hey, wherever you are, I am available. But do you want to come towards me? And those people outright said, well, that's how we're going to engage with you, Jesus. No. But this is such a good lesson in trusting God. Check your environment. Are your circumstances perfect? I don't know about you, but there's been a lot of situations and seasons in my life where the circumstances have been less than ideal. The good thing about that, if you're looking around, you're like, wow, my life's not perfect and complete in perfect categories. I have perfect kids, a perfect life, perfect marriage. If that's not you, the good news is this is Jesus' promise. He promises to meet you right where you are in that environment. See, our preferred provision of Jesus is going, Jesus, here's what I expect you to do in your top-down authority. The mountain, provide for me. I'm here, I have a need, provide for me, right? We want that top-down provision. And we're like, hey, Jesus, transport me to higher ground. Transport me to softer or easier ground. And Jesus is teaching us a lesson. That's not how this relationship is going to work. God's promised provision for us is wherever you are, deserts, valleys, rough waters, I will be with you in it. God promises, as we're in process, he promises to meet us right where we are. I love that God meets the people of God in a less than ideal environment. What a lesson for us to learn, even in that first verse. Let's keep going. The next observation I want us to make, next point, is this: honesty is not a curse. Let me say that again. Honesty is not a curse. I love this. I love what the people of God are doing. You know why I love what the people of God are complaining to God about? Because it just feels really honest. This is what they say. I'm going to paraphrase it. They're basically saying, in slavery, God, in slavery, we're getting a little hungry here. In slavery, we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us out into the desert to starve all of us to death. I love it because it's kind of intense and exaggerated, right? You're like, I can kind of sense the exaggeration in the biblical authors here and the way that they're showing the complaint. And I'm like, this is us. This is honesty. This is when we actually come and bring our complaints before a holy God. Even Moses and Aaron, if you remember in the story when we were reading it, they get so uncomfortable. There's a couple times in the narrative, they're like, well, we're just going to have to clarify with you the gravity of your complaint, right? You realize you're not complaining to us, you're complaining to God, right? They say it a couple times. They're like, whoa, be careful of your complaints, you idiots, right? Because what is the consequence of being that honest before God? And here's the truth that we learn. What is God's response to the honesty? God provides. Even in the refreshingly honest complaints. And this is not the only place in the Bible where honest, unfiltered reaction is captured. We have different categories of writings that exist throughout our biblical narrative that remind us that honest reflection is welcomed in an actual, true, authentic relationship with the Holy God. Read the Psalms. Read Lamentations. Read the prophets. Read about Job and his imperfect life and circumstances and situations and some of his response. Read Ecclesiastes. See, we got to remember this, that God's provision for us is not conditional based on our human behavior. And this is how it gets us. Back to that whole boundary conversation we began with, right? Bounded set. And how it can influence us to really gravitate to a try-harder version of our faith. We begin to believe certain things that say, if I do fill in the blank with the bad behavior, if I do this, God won't bless me. Or we get in another way of thinking that kind of is the flip side of that. If I do fill in the blank with the good behavior, well, do that more or do that better, God will bless me. And I love where this story sits in the larger biblical narrative because this is in a very preconditional moment for God's people. One of the things that happens when they move to this mountain and have this moment with God is he invites God's people to be a nation of priests. And in this moment where God is big and powerful, they're like, no, we want a mediator, right? No, Moses, you go up the mountain. And then they enter into this relationship with God that becomes this conditional command relationship. He gives the 10 commandments. Some of you might have heard this moment. The 10 commandments are given, which become this moral law. And then 603 additional laws are added to this covenant relationship. And as a part of this law and this relationship, it's very conditional. If you do this, then this will happen. If you don't do this, then there's a lot of curses. This engagement with God in this less than ideal covenant relationship where if you do this, there's blessing. If you don't, unfortunately, there are curses. This is what becomes known as the Old Covenant. And this is why in the fulfillment of God's history, we have what's called the New Covenant, which in the scripture talks about it's a better covenant. Because it's not based on conditional blessing and curses. And this is before these laws even come into play. These are God's people who are on the inside in a directional relationship where God is saying, come closer to me, trust me. And over 1,000 years later, what happens? Jesus comes, and he becomes the perfect fulfillment for those 613 laws that were less than ideal. And through his death and resurrection, he institutes this new and better covenant that fulfills God's unconditional promise of blessing. This is why in the New Testament, in the Christian Bible, we read such amazing statements, incomprehensible statements like that in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. It says this, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, what did he do? How does he demonstrate his love? He dies for us. Much like God did for the Israelites, he meets us in the honest, the raw valley of sin, right? Don't you love when the Bible does that? You're like, oh, it's the valley of sin. Oh, sin. Oh, yeah, like I'm not a perfect person. I make mistakes. So what does God think about me and my mistakes? Is the blessing going away? Is it? No. He meets us in that very place. And we do our best to be good people, but we realize we fall short. And much like when the Israelites looked towards the desert and they saw God's presence, in the same way, he chooses to meet us in those same less than perfect places, which also includes our complaints, our honesty, where we actually are so that a real God can meet our real situations. But if we don't actually want to be honest and we believe we're cursed, we will actually come before the Lord honestly whatsoever. Brutal honesty is not a curse. It's actually where God meets us. God promises to meet us right where we are. And then the last observation I want to make as we close and wrap this up this morning is that faith is formed in the everyday. In this story of the Israelites in the wilderness, it's interesting because God provides this mysterious manna bread, right? It's called manna. It's this mysterious bread from heaven, right? There's this moment. But only enough for each day. You notice that? Did you catch that when we were reading through it? No hoarding, no stockpiling, except on the sixth day, which is in the preparation to just once again, recognize we need rest. We have limitations. Rest is good. Rest is a holy thing. God liberates the Israelites from this slavery type situation. He does. He uses his top-down power in this moment of liberation. But now, look where he's leading them. He's leading them towards a moment of this is how this is going to flesh out. Much like he provided and liberated these people from their hunger in Jesus' day. This crowd, right? This beautiful parallel. And he's teaching the Israelites about trust and relationship in the everyday, inside-out stuff of life. This is why Jesus also teaches his earliest followers to pray in such a way in the Lord's Prayer that says what? Give us today our daily bread, a daily prayer, because there's this daily dependence that we're going to need upon God in relationship. And remember that teaching that we talked about earlier that caused so many people to turn away from Jesus? We're done with this. We wanted the top-down guy, and you're not giving that to us. We're out. No more free meals. Gone. See ya. The fickleness of people, right? In our relationship and our orientation towards God. Here's how Jesus connects it to the story that we are literally reading. The story of the Israelites. This is a parallel. Jesus makes reference to this story in this teaching that people end up not liking, right? But here's what he says. John chapter 6, verse 48. It says, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. And shout out to Amari and Kaylani for preaching this earlier when they did the scripture reading, if you were in the room for that. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. Verse 51, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Once again, top-down, ruler, authority. How did he come down? As an infant. How many of you guys excited about Christmas? Come on, it's coming. It's coming. Uh-oh. Hobby Lobby had stuff out 6 months ago, right? I just automatically, when I think about early, I'm nobody beats Hobby Lobby, right? Verse 51, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Do we hear the heart of God in what he's communicating to people? Where he's this is what abundant life looks like. Don't refer to me as someone that's just going to give you everything you need because I have the authority. But come on, let's come level for a second that this journey, this process, this thing called life and us in relationship, it's going to have ups, it's going to have downs. But rather than you feeling like you need to try harder for all of it, he's just saying, hey, I've taken care of it all. So just come closer. Take a step closer. Receive abundant life from me in a connected and ongoing relationship. I will always meet you where you are. I love this. In this story, God shows us a few things. He shows us that he starts close, right? He promises to transform us from the inside out. So deeply inside out that he just meets us right where we are. He knows honesty. There's no need for us to wear masks and hide from God, and there's no curses attached to it. Honesty is not a curse. He knows honesty, and he wants us to be honest with him in relationship as well. And then lastly, he desires relationship. Faith is formed in the everyday, not the big, not the spectacular. Now, I know I've had some powerful experiences with God, these one-off moments, but most of my life is filled with these everyday moments where I'm going back and forth of, God, can I trust you? Can I just tell you a little bit of a story? Here's my story lately. Callie and I have really had to trust God these past 4 years for provision. I don't know what it was about the previous seasons of ministry where it was like, God, you got our back. When we said yes to become the pastors of this church 4 years ago, I remember looking at the balance sheet. We're coming out of COVID and being like, I don't think this is going to work out. We got a big staff. We got a big building. This is really complex. Who's our church anymore? We're coming out of a really divisive pandemic. And I remember we had this meeting with our elders, our council, and it was kind of this like, hey, God, you're going to meet us right where we are. And we're like, you know what? Like, we should take our sanctuary and we should transform it. Because right now it's kind of dark and it doesn't really look like a place where people could get married. So what if, as the church, we position our building, we're thinking about this ahead of time because we're going, what if things get tight? What's a way for us to like maybe bring in some passive income for the church, to provide for things depending on what we have, what is, right? We're like, what if we transform it where our church building and our main sanctuary becomes a place where people can have an imagination to get married in it, right? Rather than it just being kind of like a one-time, like use it for Sunday, kind of dark, whatever. We're like, hey, this could help us. And at the time, it was like, yeah, I mean, people are going to be coming out of COVID and people are going to want to be getting married. It was like, yeah, like this is amazing. And that's what we did. We're like, we're being wise. God is meeting us where we're at. Look at this vision that we have. We're like, man, we're going to be wise about it. Like, okay, this is complex, but we got it. Yeah, right? Well, then honesty came, right? Because then we looked into it a little bit more, and it's great. We can want to position this building as like a low-cost wedding venue that blesses the community. The problem is we will put all the other official wedding venue communities in our city out of business. That's what's called a competitive tax advantage, where we take our religious exemption tax status and we leverage it to put other businesses out of business, which is the whole reason we actually got the tax advantage in the first place, because we're supposed to be a blessing to the community. But I didn't know that, right? We were just like, let's do this. We're going to bless people with an awesome place. And then we learned, we're like, oh yeah, whoops. Well, we can't do that. And then things kept getting more complicated for the church financially as we've been wrestling through it. Within the past few months, Callie and I'm going to be honest with you, we've taken significant pay cuts. I've been looking for other jobs. It's been so hard. And it's just like, what are you doing? Lord, are you just abandoning us? And this is where I got honest with God. I said, this feels like BS. This feels such like BS that I literally invested my life in something that became a career, and I get it, church and money, it's weird. I get it. I've always been like, that's kind of weird. But it's like, man, it just feels like you're not providing for us. And now I'm going to have to go look for other work? This feels like BS, Lord. Just got honest before God, because guess what? I'm not cursed when I do that. Because the Holy God sees me in my moments of actual stress, worry, fear. And then we had this roof thing happen. Many of you guys know. And then God provided for it in a miraculous way, right? And it was like, oh my gosh. And in the meantime, as we've been trying to be faithful over the past 4 years, within this process, our staff began to kind of develop great relationships with outside film companies and some of these smaller film productions over the past 4 years, who, as of late, have been really using our space as for their low-budget films, where they're like, they love this space because our building offers them a diversity of different ways they can shoot all these low-budget films with different scenes and so on and so forth. And there was this moment that I had a couple weeks ago. I was like, okay, things are still stressful. We still got some work to do. This is good. We're going to keep going. But it's so interesting because changing our sanctuary for a completely different purpose at that time, where it was like, God, you're looking out for us, looking ahead of us, you're meeting us right where we're at. And the honesty, as we're thinking ahead, as we're anticipating, how do we make sure we get through this really complex season for Media City Church? I had this moment where I thought, man, the reason we did that, it didn't pan out the way that I thought it would with this whole wedding thing. But it's amazing because we've developed relationships with actual production studios in our city who have been so blessed by our space and have provided us the same outcome we were looking for in the beginning of, like, how do we have passive income to make sure that the church does not feel the burden of making sure we got to do everything with the tithes and offerings while we're in this season. Without even trying to do that. Meeting us right where we are. He starts close. He inspires us. He has us dream dreams. He meets the real us with the real him, and we get to be honest before him. We realize that honesty is not a curse. And we realize he desires relationship. And we realize faith is formed in the everyday. We are not told by God to try harder so that we can break down this barrier between us and God's love. That's not what we're doing. But rather, we're told to come closer. He says, come closer into the arms of my love. Try harder. Come closer in relationship. And his promise is, whether you consider yourself in, out, Christian culture, not, churchy, unchurchy, or you're a person you're like, I'm far from whatever that is. Or you're like, I'm close. Regardless, wherever we fit in the spectrum, he promises. He meets us right where we are. Can we pray as we close this morning? Lord, we're grateful for just a moment to be reminded that an ancient story is very relevant to the way that you behave